Hello and a warm welcome to you here at New Life. I'm Stephen Russell. Good to be with you as we look at what I feel is an important subject. Whether you know it or not, you are actually worshipping something, someone, somewhere. And so I want to talk about this fascinating subject of worship that can be so culturally influenced. It can be influenced by the events of the day, all manner of things. And so I wanted to look at this particular subject and we're entitling it The Wonder of Worship. And this is part one. We're going to answer some of the basic questions. A lot of people get confused about what exactly is worship. A shout out, of course, to James Emery White of Mech Church, putting together a series that inspired us to cover this particular subject. Thank you very much to them as well. In fact, humans were made to worship, created, in fact, to worship. And something that will keep you forever restless until you do it. And probably presently you're not doing it at least the right way. Every human being spends their entire life searching for this experience and will put almost anything in its place to try and satisfy this inner longing put there by God when He created us, where that longing is to worship something. And folk will do it, they will long for it, but until they experience the real deal, the real thing, the substitutes will never ever satisfy. In all probability, unless you know what and who should be worshipped, like us all, you are substituting for this. You probably did it in some way, in some form, in some fashion today that you weren't actually aware of, that you were really worshipping. Now, you wouldn't call it that, but that's exactly what's happening. What comes to mind when you hear that word or how it makes you feel is a good question. So if I had to guess, it feels foreign to you, maybe even weird and uncomfortable. You wouldn't be alone. People typically are awkward around what we would call worshippers, because that's not the context of their own worship. What would that worship be then? Well, you long to worship, and because of that, you're worshiping a whole lot of stuff. Now, you don't just call it worship or use that particular word, or even realize, as I said, that it is worship. The word worship is from the Anglo-Saxon word that literally means worth-ship, which means that you worship when you bestow worth, honor, respect to someone or something. In the Christian context, it's giving honor and praise to God. And we call that, as Christians, worship. So, what if you're not giving God that worship? See, you can worship and have the capacity to worship anything. Take someone who has a favorite football or basketball team. I'm always fascinated by that when I turn the telly on and I'm watching some football game. Have you noticed the guy sitting like right towards the line as the football team is running up and down? And they must have paid an enormous amount for those particular tickets, and they're sitting right near the front there. Have you noticed them? I mean, they are followers. They are devotees of that team, and it's amazing to watch. I mean, they will cheer, they will shout, they will wear the clothes, they'll go to every game they can possibly go to. They dress for it, the colors of the team even, and wearing even the favorite player's jersey and their particular number. And during the game they scream, they chant, they laugh, they sing. I mean, when the touchdown is missed, they all bury their hands in their heads and almost want to cry. I mean, they give every ounce of worth, honor and respect, loyalty, adoration, commitment to that particular team. That's a form of worship that we are talking about. Well, think about a musical artist. Tickets will go up for sale and people go online for hours, stand in line for hours just to buy the ticket of their favorite musician. I remember when a new particular model of a smartphone came out. I don't want to advertise for phones, but it was an iPhone, and a new model was coming up and it went for sale, and they were really pushing this thing of this new phone and how fancy it was, and the camera inside it, and all the great things that this particular smartphone had. And there was a local television station interviewing people standing in line. I'm talking about a long, long line. It went round the building as they stood in line there, and as they were interviewing them, turns out some of the people had actually slept on the pavement the previous evening to make sure they got a spot to purchase their phone. They gave every ounce of worth and honor to those tickets of the musicians or that new device they're wanting to buy, honoring that particular thing. You see, we have this capacity to give worth to things unlike any other creature or thing that we worship on this earth. No other creature can worship like a human being or give worth to something like we can. And so the worship of things from a human perspective can be unending, all the different types that there is. You can worship the accumulation of money, a position, power, fame, possessions that you own of a home or a big boat. Point being, there's no such thing as a worship-less life. Everyone is worshiping something. Our lives are filled with small worship events and activities, whether related to people or things. We're worshiping. Let me tell you this. You tell me what's important in your life and what you prioritize. Let me have a look at it. What drives you on any given day? And I'll tell you what you're actually worshiping. You see, the kind of worship we were made for, created for, longed for, is not a small worship little thing in our lives. It's the capital W worship. The worship of the living God. We all have that capacity. And if we don't worship Him, we'll find something else to worship. And that worship will do, when we worship God, more for us than anything else we could possibly put in its place. Now you may say, well, what's the worth of worshiping God? If all this is true, we have to ask, what is real worship and what does it do for us? And so, beginning with its role in helping us order our lives around God, which is a main point, let's look at some of these things that worship does. Now, James White of Met Church, who I've mentioned to you, who sort of initiated this particular series, he listed 5 things that I found were very important, things that I could agree with, that of what worship does for us in our lives. And I thought he was right on the nail. And here they are. 1, worship helps you order your life around God. 2, worship helps you encounter and experience God. 3, worship helps you respond to God. 4, worship helps you celebrate God. And number 5, worship helps you receive spiritual encouragement and energy. That's what worship does. So let's have a brief look at all of these elements that I've just mentioned to you. Number 1, worship helps you order your life around God. What worship can be in our lives is that it provides a clear, solid, guiding note that allows us to retune our lives to God. We could say other kinds of examples. We could say it's like a compass marker for a direction we should go in. So what does that really mean for you and I? Well, it's an act, it's a moment, it's a practice that takes the fragmented pieces of our lives that can be pulled in 1,000 different directions and brings them together in a sense of what really matters, where truth really lies, what is most important in life, what actually anchors our life, what puts everything in perspective, quite frankly. Bringing all of our energies and senses to bear on the honor of God brings our lives into alignment with what is the deepest, truest thing about our lives, which is our spirituality. It makes us to exist. It makes us to live. We're not just going from day to day, plugging through life. we come alive. We're existing for a greater purpose. Worship is taking time to think about God, reflect upon God, consider God, creating a God sensitivity or mindset. For example, let me give you this example. Maybe you've read of this example. It's not a new type of example. But let's say, take for example, look around you and find at least one thing that contains the color cream. The color cream. Now, it could be on someone's clothes around you in this moment. It could be what someone is wearing. It could be the paint on the wall you're seeing. Look around and find one thing, just one thing that is cream. Take a moment here and do that. Now, have you found it? Now, when I asked you to do that, something happened. You changed how you looked at what was around you. You created a mindset. And when you created that cream mindset, if you would, you began to notice cream in places you probably hadn't before. Or at least noticed cream when you hadn't really taken notice before. The reason is simple. We tend to see what we sensitize ourselves to see. Just like we tend to think about what we sensitize ourselves to think about, worship helps us open our eyes to God, to get a God mindset, a God sensitivity that we can carry with us for a long period of time if we make it a priority. Number 2, worship helps you encounter and experience God. So the second reason that is so vital, that causes us as humans to come alive, is that we encounter and experience the Creator that formed us and made us originally. That was His concept for us, that we would be with Him. And so when we worship, we encounter and experience a living God. You see, you can't encounter God any other way but through worship, as just an everyday experience. Not just become aware of Him or sensitize to His existence, but to actually encounter and experience God. When you stop and say, I want to worship my Creator, something shifts in that moment. You're connecting with the source, a life source, your source, and my source. That's what we most long to do spiritually, an encounter with the living God, experiencing His presence, engaging in a sense that is transcendent of this normal, average life that we all kind of plod through as we go through life. No one wants to of course, be part of a dead, lifeless ritual. We don't want to dried out religious activity. None of us are attracted to that. We don't want meaningless symbols and practices that we think, what on earth are these religious people doing? We want to engage God, and there's a hunger in every single person for that. We want to experience God, and God wants that for us too. And He designed the way for that to happen. How? Through worship, the vehicle of worship. If you are not worshiping God, you're not experiencing God. You see, you don't actually have a spiritual life. Let me repeat that. You don't actually have a spiritual life. You just have a life, and it is meant to be lived spiritually. And so this is the heart of the matter. Are you in relationship with God through Jesus Christ? And if so, is it a close one? One that is nurtured, cultivated, intimate, one where you are God sensitive. So let's just run a quick diagnostic test on us here. If you're not attending to yourself spiritually, because there's this dimension that's in you, your spiritual dimension, your symptoms will be quite apparent actually. So here are some of these diagnostic questions. Let me say this. If someone were to ask you where you are growing spiritually, or what you are discovering new about God, would you have an answer? When it comes to God, is He more concept or friend? Is He an idea or your Father? What are you most comfortable talking about? God as a theological or philosophical construct or some other kind of concept, or are you actually in relationship with Him? How often do you consider God's presence throughout the day? How often do you really think about him and engage him? When was the last time you felt a specific prompting come to you from God to act in a counterintuitive way as a result of spending time alone with him? If someone were to ask you if you were more like Jesus today than you were a year ago, what would your honest answer be? You see, whatever your answers are to any of those questions depends on whether or not you're actually experiencing God. As a key to experiencing God, that key is this little word called worship or worth giving, because that's what takes you to a different level of living altogether. You become the best of who you really are. You become complete when you're with him and he is with you. Living on the surface of life is easy. Days are easily filled with activity and noise and deadlines and fetching and carrying and duty and responsibilities. But your spirit, your soul, that which is able to engage and experience God, is beneath the surface. The ancient Celts knew what life had to be lived on, and that was on both levels, and that they had to be brought into union, this hidden spiritual side of us and the normal activity outside life of us. And deeply rooted within Celtic Christian spirituality are what is known as thin times, they would call it. Not all the time in their thinking, in this particular culture's thinking. It created equal or affords the same spiritual benefits when you did specific things. And it is what we do with our time that makes thin or thick times. One lets God in, the other keeps the work of God's Spirit at bay and far away from us. You see, worship is that thin time. That's when the doors swing open within your inner person. You've just allowed God in. Through what vehicle? Through worship, worth giving. So it's important for us to see how important that is. Okay, number 3, worship helps you respond to God. So this next benefit is that it helps you to respond to God the right way. You see, sometimes when I meet up with people and I talk about God and they respond to God, but they respond to God either out of anger or frustration, or God didn't answer my prayer, or where was he when I was struggling and suffering. You see, when you respect someone, when you have honor for someone, and certainly when you love someone, it's natural to want to let those feelings be known. You want to tell them, show them, do something for them. Of course, the wives often tell the husbands, don't tell me you love me, show me that you love me. And so worship is like that. Worship is one of the most personal, authentic ways to respond to God relationally. And when you know him relationally, not just in facts and figures you heard when you went to Sunday school 40 years ago or 30 years ago, not just things you heard about from time to time from a friend here or an article you read there, the name of God was mentioned, not just the God you know through a swear word in a movie you heard, but you really know God. You've spent that time to get to know him. Let me tell you, my friend, you won't be so angry with him. You won't be, kind of leaning towards shouting at him and getting rid of him because he didn't do what you really wanted him to do. No, when you get to know him, you want to articulate your feelings, expressing yourself verbally and emotionally and physically. It deepens and cements your relationship with God. Think about how this works in other relationships. Let's say you're dating someone just before you get married. And it's one of the biggest relational lines you actually get to at a certain point in time that you can cross. If I was to ask you, what do you think that line is? Maybe this is what it is. It's when you first tell them that you really love them. Think about that. You get to this time, you've gone out with them, you went to the local burger joint, you've hung out, you visited them, they visited you, you've met some of the family. And there comes a moment in time when you look right at them and you tell them, I love you. That's a seminal moment in that relationship. Well, think about a relationship that perhaps now you're married and it's further down the road than that, a year or 2 or 3 or 5 or 10, and the relationship is strained. What can cut through most disagreements, any strife, any conflict that's going on? Reminding yourself that you really love that person. It's no different with God. Expressing your worship to Him is a decisive moment you take to that relationship. It's a decisive moment in that relationship when you stop and in a moment of worship you say, God, I love you. You've just crossed a very, very important relational line. God, I love you. And so this is why the Bible presents worship in terms of an expression, such as, let's look at, for instance, Psalm 75. It says, I will praise you with music on the harp, oh my God. I will sing praises to you with a lyre. A lyre is kind of like a sort of a stringed instrument. Let me go on. O Holy One of Israel, I will shout for joy and sing your praise. Psalm 71, verses 22-23 in the New Living Translation. Psalm 59. David, the King of Israel, says, I will sing about your power. Each morning I will sing with joy about your unfailing love, for you have been my refuge. Oh, my strength, to you I will sing praises. That's Psalm 59, again in the New Living Translation. Can you see the expression, the outward expression? That's called worship. Worshiping God. Why? You're in relationship with Him. You've crossed that line. You said, God, I love you. That's a moment of deep worship that God responds to. Number 4, worship helps you celebrate God. Fourth payoff for worship is that you get to celebrate God. To celebrate God is to take time to remember all that He's done, just like in the Psalms I read, and just say, yay, God. It's like having a party in His honor. And it's supposed to be festive in atmosphere as well. Now, there are moments and times of quiet reflection, or moments and times of a soulful, quiet, beautiful song that is sung as an outpouring of love to God. Or there is sometimes just the exuberant, hey, kind of shout out to God there. Take a look at the spirit of this through the 96th Psalm in the Bible, and it's using the Hebrew word for God, which is Yahweh, and it says this. It says, "Sing Yahweh a brand new song, earth and everyone in it sing for Yahweh worship, Yahweh, for Yahweh is great and worth 1,000 hallelujahs." Bravo, Yahweh, bravo. Everyone join in the great shout, encore, in awe because of His beauty, in awe because of the might. Bring gifts and celebrate. Everyone worship, get out the message. Yahweh rules. That's Psalm 96 in the Message Bible. Professor Eugene Peterson wrote that Message Bible. And so there's Psalm 96. What a beautiful, exuberant outpouring of praise. That's a party, guys. And we need parties in this day and age. Put on the news, boy oh boy do we need parties. And so it's important to stop and say, it's been a good season. Let's just stop and celebrate. As important as it is organizationally, I mean, even managers will stop and say, okay, team, come together. Let's just celebrate. Let's go out and have a meal together to say thank you to everyone. So even managers and CEOs and all these big guys of these big companies see how organizationally important that is. It's even more important spiritually for you, for me, to celebrate God for who He is. The Bible says that every good and perfect gift is from God. Everything good, everything noble, everything praiseworthy, everything that has worth and merit, truth and goodness is from God. What moves your spiritual life from one that is lifeless and dead, and like, I just don't want to go to church or read the Bible, and that's all just dead stuff, to one that is passionate, vibrant, is to practice the celebration of the goodness of God. God, you're a good God, just like David did in that passage I read you. Finally, number 5, worship helps you receive spiritual encouragement. And I want to add the word there, energy. Final final aspect is that you receive spiritual encouragement and energy when you're worshiping God. And so while the primary purpose of worship is not what we get out of it, but what we give to God through it, when you gather with others and you begin to worship, there's just no way you can walk away from that situation without receiving an injection of spiritual energy and encouragement. It's like when people go to a football match, same thing happens. Why? Because they're worshiping. They're sitting on the sidelines, they're cheering their team, appreciating their team, all kinds of things. Really, their worship is a little misplaced in all honesty. But on the way home, they talk about, did you see that one? He ran here. And did you see the long pass down? They think, wow, what a great match. And they're discussing and talking, and they just feel invigorated. That's how worship should be for you and I as well. Invigorating, uplifting. That's the old-fashioned way of saying that you feel uplifted. One day I was in Africa and I was driving, and it was getting to be dusk, and I wasn't watching carefully the road, and I hit a mud hole. I mean, just slam dunked right into this mud hole, and it was deeper than I realized, and got buried up halfway up the wheels. I was in mud, couldn't move. There I am, the sun's going down, I'm far away from everything. What am I going to do? And fortunately, thank goodness, a man comes down the road in a truck. Oh, he jumped out, asked what's going on, told him, and he said, oh, I can help you, and he attached a chain. And I tell you guys, within minutes, what would have been a very long night on my own in the middle of the bush there, and would have kept me hours trying to dig out, I was free from that hole literally within minutes. He uplifted me, and I felt like a real happy camper. That's what worship does. You're encouraged. You are lifted out of that muddy hole you find yourself in. The Bible actually calls it the miry clay. It's the clay where you get stuck in and you can't move left or right. You're just jammed in there. Life experiences, you feel tired, you're exhausted, you're just plowing on day in, day out. Life is just one long, heavy lift. Well, when you begin to worship, you feel encouraged to go on. You're revitalized. You are uplifted when you worship with others. So I hope by now you see that worship is more than just a service. A worship service, of course, can help facilitate worship. It can encourage worship. It can provide opportunities for worship. But in and of itself, it isn't worship. Worship only happens when there is a worshiper, just like the facts I've given to you now. So experiencing what worship has to offer in your life depends on you actually being a worshiper, which takes two things. First, understanding who it is you're worshiping. Who exactly are you worshiping? What are you worshiping? Because that alone should only go to God. And then second, knowing how to worship Him in spirit and in truth is so important, which is what we're going to be exploring over the next number of weeks as we look at the series, The Wonder of Worship. This has been part 1. Come back and join in again, and we'll look at The Wonder of Worship part 2 next week. And God bless you. Thank you for coming along. I'm Stephen Russell from New Life right here on Cape Cod, a resource center for local churches and believers. And so we love to teach God's Word and share things with you that help encourage you and grow you as a believer. God bless you. We'll see you soon.